Hi, my name is Kiran from University of Tokyo Edge Capital.
So what is the firm that you represent?
So I'm part of a Japanese fund called UTEC, which means University of Tokyo Edge Capital.
Okay.
We are a $550 million deep science and technology fund based out of Japan, linked with University of Tokyo but independent.
So how long have you been looking at the Indian space?
So actually we started investing in India just 1.5 years back when I joined UTEC as the first non-Japanese member. My background is machine learning, so I mainly look at AI related startups. So we've been specifically focusing on India for the past 18 months or so.
Okay.
And we look at India as a source of innovation.
Okay. So can you give us maybe a brief summary of what kind of technology you're looking for and what you're finding in India?
In India, great. So actually we've done 3 investments in India. One is called tricog.
Just step back a bit. So how did you identify these startups?
Right.
So what was the area you were looking at and why did you narrow it down to this one?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. So actually what is useful, let's say healthcare AI, what is the most important thing in healthcare AI is data.
Right.
So collection of data because of regulations is super difficult in Japan or even in US or any developed markets. India has great talent in AI obviously. The problem is also here, and the data regulations are not so strict, which can be a competitive advantage itself.
Okay.
So our thesis was to do a remote diagnosis company, collecting the data in India and developing the algorithm and then going global, especially from India to other adjacent related markets like Southeast Asia or Africa, and then maybe with certain changes going to Japan as well. That is interesting. And second, when we look at India, we were always looking for, India is good in software, Japan is good in hardware.
Okay.
So can we see, hardware also means medical devices. So when we look at health tech, can we see AI companies in India who have good software, who can collaborate with device companies in Japan? So that is how we narrowed down on tricog.
So you picked India not only for the AI talent, but also the fact that the data was relatively unregulated.
Yeah, that's
right?
true. In the sense that
You
is
train the AI and
that
then
is
you
the
use
great
it, right? Okay.
advantage of India.
And you say that because I guess the training on one kind of a race, being Indians, does that work on Southeast Asian? Is that kind of the thing? That's why you're doing it in India as opposed to anywhere else?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, if it is cancer or something, which is very race or ethnicity oriented, then collecting data in India doesn't work that well. But what tricog focuses on, for example, is cardiac analysis using ECG. And ECG data is same, it's an electrical signal, so it is same across any ethnicity.
Okay, so give us other examples of where you're looking at machine learning and AI applications in India.
Actually, another company that we invested in India happens to be also in healthcare. It's more on the life sciences side. It's called Bugworks. They are developing a new class of antibiotics targeted at drug-resistant infections. Unfortunately, India is one of the main places where the infections originate. So the problem was here. The core team comes from AstraZeneca, which had an R&D center in India, and that closed down. That opened up a global pool of talent in India, who are all of Indian origin, but they were well educated outside and in India as well. So they are developing a new class of antibiotics, and they are using machine learning in 2 things. One is multiple chemical structures. Which one do you which one hits the right molecule? That means target finding, and in identifying the right patients to do clinical trial. So after we invested, Bugworks got a $9 million grant from US government. So the beautiful collaboration for Bugworks is that one of the Japanese professors from Tokyo Institute of Technology is a scientific advisor to this company, and they are collaborating with him to upscale their R&D.
Is clinical trials another area of where there's regulatory sort of advantage in India because they're not as well governed? Is that kind of the thesis again?
That is true too. Actually, last year in this very conference, we made that point to Dr. Mr. Suresh Prabhu's team, that India could be one of the places. But the problem is that clinical trials done in India in some cases is not accepted outside, and the same vice versa. So we presented a proposal that why don't you do clinical data harmonization? And they took into account, and actually they changed the law and they did it in 3 months. Clinical data harmonization means you do a clinical trial in one country, let's say in India. Instead of when you go to FDA, you do a smaller trial there and you use the Indian data. And likewise, if somebody has done a clinical trial in Japan, by doing a smaller study on Indian population, can you do that? So that's sort of harmonization. So what Indian government passed a law, taking our and many other investors' opinion, is that for certain conditions, even if the clinical trial is done outside, the drug can be sold in India with a small study instead of doing a full-blown trial.
Okay. So apart from the health space, what other sectors have you found ML and AI applications?
Healthcare is great, and the other thing that we are looking at in India these days is also robotics and agri-robotics space. Some of the other things we are looking at is 3D printing in robotics. So what we tend to look at, what we are finding in India is that we are finding kind of Silicon Valley level innovation at a fairly developing country cost structure, which is very useful for us.
What are the challenges you found so far?
Yeah, that's good. So maybe two to three challenges. One, because we look at deep science and technology and B2B, finding sales talent to sell globally is a bit difficult. To scale up the revenue, that is one challenge.
Of the portfolio companies. That's not a challenge for you per se, right?
Oh, as a challenge for the portfolio companies, challenge for us. But exits are again, so
exits are harder
because of that, especially in the B2B space, because in Japan most of the exits happen through IPO.
Right.
But unfortunately, the Indian stock exchange is quite difficult for tech companies to IPO.
So that's the challenge I'm talking about. So what is the issue there? Why would you not?
Well, a couple of issues there. One, the Indian stock exchange kind of has a rule that for a smooth IPO in the National Stock Exchange or BSE, you got to be profitable for 3 years, but several tech companies are not.
But weren't they talking about a kind of a smaller or innovative exchange and stuff?
Yeah, so Japan has something called mothers, like Nasdaq also has that. So that has less regulatory barriers for that. So now Indian government is also talking about it. But second thing comes, how do you bring about liquidity in that market? Because startups may be able to IPO because of less regulation, but if there is not enough liquidity, then that's a problem. So that is one thing that's a challenge. And second is still, how do we, when we wire money into India and take money out, some of the RBI and SEBI regulations per se are fine, but the predictability is a problem. Sometimes it may take 1 month, sometimes it may take 6 months. So that becomes a bit difficult for us, but we are bullish that it will change in the future.
Yeah, I guess that the US and Japan are fairly developed markets with obviously developed institutional investors, which India doesn't have. That's kind of been a theme discussion in the plenary session today as well.
Right, yeah.
Speaking of which, I mean, you've spent the day here, and you said you came here last year as well.
I came here last year.
What is the value of a conference like this? What is your message to IVCA?
Yeah, I think IVCA has done a great job of organizing the conference, and actually the managing partner of UTEC is chairman of GVCA, so we have really good collaborations with them. I think one thing that was very useful last time as well is that the discussions we had, actually in 3 months they turned it into a law, right? It was not just a random discussion, it led to a positive outcome, so that was good. And second, I think bringing the fund managers as well as investors from around the world to actually listen to what problems we are facing as well as startups are facing and trying to find a solution. I think IVCA has done a great job of that.